What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my early thoughts ahead of Game Week 10. So I've got some key talking points such as Chris Wood, or are there other alternative forwards that we should consider, what to do with Gabriel, and also what to do with Haaland as well. And then I've got some notes from the weekend. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. Let's start with Chris Wood, the guy that's on absolute fire so far this season. 7 goals in the first 9 game weeks, which is just incredible value considering he started at 6 million. He's now up to 6.4, and the question is, have we missed the boat on him? And if not, is he the best cheap forward to bring in this week, or is there someone else that we should consider instead? Now, in terms of Chris Wood in isolation, I think he's a really solid option. The starts are pretty much secure. The minutes are pretty decent. He does often get subbed early, but usually it's 75 minutes plus before he does. He's playing in a pretty strong team. 0.37 expected goals per 90 so far this year is pretty good. He is overperforming a little bit, I would say. I mentioned this in the game week preview last week. Like, he's 0.37 expected goals per 90, actual goals is 0.87. So the rate of returns will slow down, but that doesn't mean that he's a bad option. Just because he's probably not going to score another 7 goals in the next 9 fixtures doesn't mean that he's a bad price at 6.4 million. So overall, I like him. I think 3 of the next 4 fixtures are great. West Ham at home, Newcastle at home in 10 and 11, and then Ipswich at home in 13. But Arsenal away in 12 is not great. And then after the Ipswich game, you've got Man City away in 14. So 3 of the next 5 are decent. 2 of the next 5 are probably the 2 hardest fixtures you're going to get all season. You could probably throw Liverpool away into the mix as well, given how well they've defended this year. I think whether you bring him in really depends on your overall squad setup and how well you can cover him in 12 and 14 specifically. Like, if you had to play him in those fixtures, it wouldn't be the end of the world. You probably wouldn't go out of your way to sell him, but ideally you wouldn't play him unless you absolutely had to. I think for a lot of people, you've probably got Morgan Rogers, and in 12, he's got Palace at home, and in 14, it's Brentford at home. So he does cover Chris Wood pretty nicely. And I think for that reason, I certainly wouldn't overlook Chris Wood as an option. And if we take a look at the longer-term fixtures, it's Man United away after City away, then it's Villa at home, Brentford away, and then in 18 it's Spurs at home, Everton away, Wolves away. So the fixtures do get tougher from game week 14 onwards. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away games between 14 and 20, and then the home games of Villa and Spurs. So I think Chris Wood is a tough one because I look at him and think he's just such a good price. He's playing so well. The returns aren't going to keep up at this rate, but he will keep ticking over. And 3 of the next 4 are so good. But from 14 onwards, it does get a bit trickier. I just think when he's 6.4, if you haven't got Cunha, he's probably the slightly better option. Side note, by the way, Chris Wood is currently flagged. I think he'll be fine, but obviously don't bring him in unless you absolutely have to until we get more info. But if you look at Cunha, he's 0.1 million more, and his fixtures are just great from now until game week 17. There are no games there where you'd be worried about playing him. You've got Palace at home, Southampton at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home. Then it's Everton away, West Ham away, Ipswich at home, Leicester away. All those fixtures are just really good. And even if you got to game week 18 and he's still fully fit and available, like Man United at home, Spurs away, Forest at home, it's not going to be must-sell territory. Hopefully by that point you've got spare transfers. You might look to move him on to whoever's got decent fixtures around that time. There's no point worrying about it right now. But I just love the fact you've got no Arsenal away, no Man City away, over the next kind of 8 game weeks. So I don't know I feel like I can't sit here and say you shouldn't buy Chris Wood, and I'm not saying that. I do think he's a good option over the next 4, but I think if it's a choice between him and Cunha, I find it really difficult to back Chris Wood when Cunha's fixtures are so good for so long. And I think that should come into your thinking that he's not going to cause you any issues down the line. Like, if Chris Wood does happen to blank over the next 1 or 2 fixtures, all of a sudden then you're looking at Arsenal and City away in the next 3. And even with that Ipswich game, it doesn't look quite so good. So I personally think that Cunha's maybe a little bit better. The other player that I'm looking at the moment is Raul Jimenez. Played another 90 minutes against Everton in game week 9. Didn't return, to be fair, but he's now got 4 goals, 1 assist this season. I'm fairly confident he will take the next penalty as well if Fulham get one, because Andreas Pereira took it. and he missed. And obviously, Raul Jimenez took the one before that and scored. And his record is pretty good. And Andreas Pereira is not necessarily going to be on the pitch all the time either. If we look at his minutes recently, he is on... Let me just find him here. Yeah, he only got 78 against Everton, 67 against Villa, 64 against City. So I really like Raul Jimenez. Now, I don't necessarily think in isolation between now and 17 that he's better than Cunha, but he is a nicer price at 5.7 million. And you've really got to take that into account on what your future moves might be. But I really want to get Palmer and Salah and Saka at some point in my team. Like, something has to be sacrificed. And it might be going for a Raul Jimenez, who's quite nice in the short term, but a bit more, I don't know, not so good long term. Like in 13, it's Spurs away. In 15, it's Arsenal at home. And in 16, it's Liverpool away. But from a value perspective at 5.7, that difference from Wood and Cunha could be quite decent. And if you think that Jimenez is going to stay in the team long term, like his fixtures going into kind of December and January are pretty decent. And like even short term, Brentford at home, Palace away, Wolves at home is quite nice. So again, you're going to have to look at your own team and just run it through the next few weeks and see where you're not going to be completely happy playing these forwards and who you've got cover for instead. And also who else you want to bring in. The other forward that I think people will be looking at, especially after his performance in Game Week 9, is Visser for Brentford. And I really do not mind the Visser and Mbeumo double up. This is only 5.9 million. It's Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, Everton away, Leicester at home. Next 4 fixtures, which are pretty decent. After that, it gets a little bit trickier, but not terrible. Villa away, Newcastle at home, Chelsea away, Forest at home. So as long as Visser can stay fit at that price point, he's still a really nice option. And his expected goals per 90 so far this year are 0.86, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, those numbers will probably come down quite a bit because he's only played limited minutes so far this season. But I think his actual output has just been decent for a while now. Last year, he scored 12 goals and got 4 assists in 2,400 minutes. This year, it's already 4 goals, 2 assists in 5 starts. So the guy is just good. Brentford attack is decent. The next 4 fixtures are great. He is also someone to look at. I think between Visser and Raul Jimenez, it all just comes down to what you think long term. Because the next 3 fixtures for Fulham are quite good. And long term, they got some really nice fixtures. Southampton at home in 17, Bournemouth at home in 19, Ipswich at home in 20. Can we rely on him to still be in the team at that point? I think the way he's playing right now, there's no chance that Muniz gets in. But in the back of my mind, I know they've got Muniz right there. And at some point, if Raul Jimenez does drop off a little bit, could Muniz come in? And also, obviously, we're saying that Jimenez, or at least I'm saying that Jimenez will probably take the next penalty. That's not a guarantee. So in that regard, he might not have an advantage over Visser. I don't know. I just think the way Jimenez is playing right now, it's hard to picture a world where he gets dropped. But it would only take a couple of bad performances, and then maybe Muniz would come in. I think if you're willing to take the risk on Jimenez's long-term minutes, he's probably a slightly better option than Visser, but it is very close. And I think the fact that Jimenez has to play Arsenal and Liverpool back-to-back in 15 and 16 is not ideal. So if money's no object, I'm buying Cunha this week. If you can cover Chris Wood nicely, I still think he's a good option as well, but I would just take the fixtures for Cunha. All I will end this section is there's lots of cheap forwards right now. It feels like this is the meta in FPL. Like premium midfielders, cheap forwards is the way to go. That won't necessarily always be the case, but right now it's looking pretty good. So to bring a couple in, even if it goes wrong, like you bring Cunha in and he gets injured, there's a lot of other options to go to. You're not suddenly going to be stuck looking for money to have to upgrade to like an Isak, Havertz, Nicholas Jackson, whoever it might be. So yeah, take your pick. I think Jimenez, Visser, Wood, Cunha, all great. If I need one this week and I've got the money and it doesn't impact future moves, I'm pretty sure I'm going to buy Cunha. Let's talk about Gabriel next. Still pretty popular despite the lack of Arsenal clean sheets recently. His overall ownership is 26.8% and he's up to 6.3 million. But unfortunately, he picked up an injury in the game against Liverpool yesterday and had to go off around the 50th minute, I think it was. Yeah, 53 minutes. Now, originally, when I was watching that game, it looked like he'd gone down off the ball, which is never ideal. But then they showed a replay to say that it might have been a challenge from Darwin Núñez a little bit earlier. So the challenge happens. He carries on playing. Then he goes down off the ball, gets some treatment, carries on playing, and then he goes down again and has to go off. Now, at this point, we don't know the extent of the injury, and obviously because it's an Arsenal player, I wouldn't be expecting a time frame from Mikel Arteta. I did see this tweet, and it's from Con Harrison, who often has a bit of Arsenal news, and he said early indications from the dressing room tests are that Gabriel's injury isn't serious, seems to have jarred his knee, but scan tomorrow will determine the extent of the injury. So it might be good news, but we don't know for sure, and obviously that scan could show anything, right? It might rule him out for a month or more. We just don't know. The good news is if you're someone that wants to hold him long term for the fixtures from 12 onwards, is you've got the international break between 11 and 12. So it's possible that he could be out for nearly a month and only miss 2 Premier League games, which are Newcastle away in 10 and Chelsea away in 11. I probably wouldn't have been expecting clean sheets in those games anyway. So if he does miss out, but he's back for 12 and you've got a decent enough bench to cover him in the meantime, you could potentially look to hold on to him. If we're in doubt as to when he's going to be back, or he's going to be missing like 12, 13 onwards, then I think it's a pretty easy sell. And to be honest with you, even if there's a chance that he's back for 12, for a lot of people, he might be just a sell anyway, depending on what the rest of your squad looks like. So for my team, for example, I've got Greaves, who's out at the moment. Obviously, Gabriel has picked up a knock. I don't really want to have to play Pinnock every single week. And Rico Lewis is fine until Kyle Walker is back, and then I'm going to be worried about him as well. So I'm not sure my defence can really hold together with Gabriel out too long term. Personally, I've got the same opinion as last week. I think when Gabriel's back fit, with Saliba back from suspension, when they get other players back fit in that back four as well, like that Arsenal defence will still be really good. But right now, it just doesn't look an ideal time to hold on to them. So guaranteed to be back for 12 onwards, you could maybe think about keeping. Otherwise, I think a lot of people are going to sell. In terms of replacements, there's a lot of options that you could move to. One player that's going to be really popular because he's cheap and just scored his 3rd goal of the season. Someone pointed that out to me on stream last night. It's his 3rd goal in the last 4 games. Is Aït-Nouri. Now, I really like him as a pick. Other people also pointed out that O'Neill said after the game that he wasn't completely happy playing a back 5 and he's probably going to go to a back 4 moving forward. But I don't think Aït-Nouri not playing as a wing-back is a problem. He's still very attacking even in that back 4. And as we've spoken about with Cunha, the fixtures are great. The only slight issue is he's now on 4 yellow cards. I hate when you need to bring in a player that's on 4 yellow cards because the initial instinct is always to ignore them. Because if they get suspended, it is just a pain. But obviously, what could happen in the meantime is he doesn't pick up a yellow card for ages and scores lots of points. I think in these situations, there's not a right or a wrong call. Because ultimately, right, let's say you bring him in 10 and he doesn't get a yellow card. Happy days. You've got Aït-Nouri super attacking against Southampton at home. If he does pick up a yellow card in 10, okay, you miss him for the Southampton at home game, but then he's got really good fixtures after that. And I think because Wolves' fixtures are so good, I'm not sure the threat of that 5th yellow card is quite as bad as it usually would be. Let's say you had like Nottingham Forest fixtures, for example, and you were thinking of bringing one of their defenders in on 4 yellow cards, where it might be that, you know, you bring him in for West Ham, and then they pick up a yellow, then they're suspended for Newcastle, and then you've got Arsenal away straight away afterwards, and then you've also got City away in 14. That just wouldn't feel great. I think for Wolves, you can still make a case to bring in Aït-Nouri, but I think if your defence is fragile with injuries and suspensions, I'd be a little bit more careful. So it probably depends on what the state of your squad is looking like right now. But for 4.5, I think with the fixtures they've got and how attacking he is, I don't think it really gets too much better. A long-term move would be someone like Colwill at Chelsea. Not great for the next 2, Man United away and Arsenal at home. But from 12 onwards, the Chelsea fixtures are pretty nice for quite a while. But I wouldn't mind playing Colwill, Leicester away in 12. If I had to play him against Villa at home in 13, I wouldn't be massively happy about it, but it's fine. Southampton away in 14, Brentford at home in 16, Everton away in 17, Fulham at home in 18, etc., etc. The good fixtures go on for a while. That's why anyone that's not on Cole Palmer really wants to bring him in soon. I think Colwill for what is he on now? Sorry, he's 4.6 million, not 4.5. He's only on 2 yellow cards. He's a nice long-term pick. So if you're going cheap, they're the kind of players I like. I think with Rico Lewis, I don't know, if you didn't bring him in for the Southampton at home game, like you're now getting him for 3 away games in the next 4, Bournemouth, Brighton and Liverpool, and the home game Spurs. He's still a good price at 4.8, but I just don't see many clean sheets on the horizon. I think I'd want a bit more of a time frame on Kyle Walker as well. But that's your cheap options. If you want to go more expensive, then I quite like Vardiol, but obviously you are bringing him in again after that Southampton at home game. But at least his minutes are pretty decent. His goal threat is good as well. And long term, you know that Man City are going to pick up clean sheets along the way. So he's decent. I don't completely hate, if you want to stick around this price point, is someone like Van Dijk. And I know it looks a bit knee-jerk because he scored yesterday, but I quite like the next 3. Brighton at home, Villa at home, Southampton away. I think Liverpool defence is good. After that, it's City at home, Newcastle away, not quite so great. Then most of the fixtures after that are not too bad. There's not a huge amount of games where you'd be worried about playing Van Dijk. You could almost see him as a long-term option. It's just that 6.1 million price point, while Konate is 5.3, it's quite hard to make a case to pay that extra money. I mean, Van Dijk, I would say, does have higher goal threat from set pieces and is absolutely nailed on. There is no chance he misses a game, whereas Konate could miss a game. But the amount of minutes and matches he's getting at the moment, I just keep saying to myself, at what point will I just trust Konate? And I feel like it's probably got to me now. So I don't mind a Liverpool defender. Vardiol's okay. And I mean, Spurs never keep clean sheets, it feels like. But Porro, Villa at home, Ipswich at home next 2. If you can bench him for City away in 12, he's then got Fulham at home. So 3 home games next 4. I don't mind Porro at 5.5, but I appreciate that people might not be too keen on bringing a Spurs defender in. 2 clean sheets all season, just 1 goal. He's only 5.5 though, quite a nice price. There's probably someone else that I'm missing. I feel like there's someone obvious. I mean, if you haven't got Trent and you've got the money to upgrade from Gabriel, I really like him. I still think he's the best Liverpool defender. So Trent, Vardiol, Porro, if you're sticking around that price or going up slightly, maybe Konate. Otherwise, you're probably coming down to like a Colwell. But I think for most people, it's 8 Nuri. Be aware that he's on 4 yellows, but I think because of the fixtures, I wouldn't let that massively put me off. Like if I brought him in for Gabriel, for example, just really quickly now on this, and he got a yellow card against Palace and missed the Southampton game, as long as no one else gets injured, then I've got Trent against Villa, who I'm definitely going to play. I've got Pinnock against Bournemouth, which I don't trust Brentford defence, but I could easily play him in that home game. And then as long as Rico Lewis is still playing, I've got Brighton away. So it's a bit of a risk for me, because if Rico Lewis was to miss game week 11, I'd have 2 defenders. But I still think 8 Nuri is so good that I would probably take that risk. So we've got to talk about Erling Haaland. The guy's on 11 goals from 9 games, which is a really good return, but he's only on 1 goal in the last 4 matches. And all of a sudden, and people might say this has been the case all season, but all of a sudden for a lot of us, that price of 15.4 million is starting to feel a little bit expensive. Even to the point that if he scores another 11 goals in the next 9 games, it might still be more beneficial for your FPL team to go without him. Now, before I talk about possibly selling him, I want to make it clear, Erling Haaland is not a must sell. If you want to keep him, that is absolutely fine and probably something you should strongly consider. Because I think the fact that he is consistently playing 90 minutes week in, week out is not something to be overlooked. He's not getting early substitutions. That might happen long term, but it's not happening right now. They don't really have another number 9 to go to. And even if someone like Foden could play as the 9, for example, they haven't got Kevin De Bruyne to fall back on either at the moment. Doku's out, Grealish is out. There's a lot of injuries there. Haaland is going to keep continuing to play 85 to 90 minutes plus pretty much every single week. And most fixtures are pretty good for Man City. On paper, yes, I've said for Rico Lewis, for example, 3 of the next 4 are away. I don't see a huge amount of clean sheets. But in terms of goals, like Haaland is fully capable of a brace against Bournemouth and against Brighton and against Spurs. Liverpool away a bit trickier maybe, but a brace against Forest, a brace against Palace, this is possible, right? Haaland could go on a run where he scores 10 in the next 5 fixtures or something like that. He's just that good. So it's not a case of you should sell him because, you know, 1 return in 4 is going to keep happening. It's about whether or not spreading the money around is worth it. Now, if you're going to consider this, I would say a few things. 1, I feel like you've got to be prepared to be in it for at least the medium term. If you're going to sell Haaland and then want him back in game week 14, I don't really see the point because it's 2 transfers out and then 2 back in. So that's 4 transfers you're booking in for 4 game weeks. It just doesn't feel worth it, especially when we know that Haaland is capable of doing damage against pretty much anyone, right? So I think you've got to be in it until probably around game week 17, 18, 19. If you're prepared to go that long, you could definitely consider it. I also think this is probably a move for people that have already spread the money around or have multiple transfers to do just that. Like if you're going to sell Haaland to get like Salah or Palmer, but then you've got like 4 or 5 million in the bank, and you've only got 1 transfer next week, it's going to take a little while to spread that money around. And in that situation, again, it might not be quite so worth it, because the benefit of selling Haaland is all the money you've got elsewhere. And if you can't make that happen quickly, you're not really getting the benefit. Because again, it's not a case of Haaland is terrible and you've got to get rid of him. It's all the other benefits that might make you think about selling him. So for me, and Gabriel has put a massive spanner in the works on this, but I basically wanted to hold Raya, Gabriel, Trent. I want to get Palmer, and I want to get Saka eventually. It's very difficult to do while also holding Haaland at my team value, right? It's impossible. I can't have Trent and Gabriel and Raya and Saka and Palmer and keep Haaland. It just doesn't work. There's too many other transfers to make for that to happen. But if I sell Haaland to Cunha, who is, as I said earlier, the forward that I would want, I can then do Semenyo or Rodgers to Salah, and then if Son's out, I can just get Palmer in. So instead of Haaland, I've got Salah, and I think those two are probably pretty close over the next 8 to 10 game weeks. But I've also got Palmer, and I haven't had to sell Trent, Raya, and Gabriel. And no, this is not some big ploy so that I can keep Fernandes. Eventually, once the next 2 fixtures are out of the way for Spurs, and I want to sell Solanke, that then gives me my money to do Bruno to Saka, and then I can just get any 6.6 million forward. And as we've already discussed, there's a ton of options. I can go and get Chris Wood, maybe Danny Welbeck from Brighton when their fixtures get better, Visser, etc., Raul Jimenez, whoever it might be, right? So that player could then come in, and all of a sudden, okay, I don't have Haaland, but I do have Palmer, Saka, Salah, and Mbeumo, and I've still got Trent, who I think will be good long term, and I've got to keep my double Arsenal defence. Now, it might be that Gabriel's ruled out for ages and there's no need to worry about keeping him, but that could just be Van Dijk or, I don't know, Vardy or whoever it might be. And basically, my play would be, rather than messing around with cheap defenders who look good right now, don't get me wrong, I really like Aitner, and I think if I don't go for him, I'm going to regret it. I'll just say that now. But long term, having defenders that you don't have to worry about is quite nice, because other issues will crop up. So if I can get to this kind of structure pretty quickly, I do quite like it. It obviously relies on Palmer, Saka, Salah continuing to do well, but I don't think there's going to be a massive drop-off from them. And if you look at, I was talking about this on stream, if you look at the points per match so far this season, Haaland's on 8.3, which is great, and he will continue to be a great option. But Palmer's at 8.8, Salah's at 9.3. Now, by the end of the season, I would probably, not guaranteed, but probably expect Salah and Palmer to be under Haaland's points per match, but not by a massive amount. And obviously, they're less money. So I think it's viable to go without Haaland, but I think you've got to be prepared to do it for the long haul. You've got to be prepared to not instantly switch it back the first time Haaland gets a hat-trick, because he will get a hat-trick, right? We shouldn't kid ourselves that he's now a bad option. And I think you need to be able to spread that money around quickly enough. So that's basically the crux of it. You've got Salah instead of Haaland, which I think are pretty close as options anyway. Then you've also got like 2.5 million to spend elsewhere. So it's about whether or not you're happy with your cheaper options, or whether you want to keep the more expensive players and just hope that eventually they do win out. Because earlier on in the season, when people had Haaland drafts, players like Smith Rowe and all the cheaper neighbours were doing really well. The minute that stops, teams with, 3 premium midfielders and like Trent, etc., will start doing better. So you got to basically decide how you want to set up. I'm not trying to sit on the fence here. I really don't know what I'm going to do. I'm keen on making the switch, possibly because I'm doing badly at the moment, and I know that a lot of no Haaland teams are doing all right. But because I've got injuries to Gabriel and Son, it might be just that I've got other transfers to make. I don't know. So again, I'm just going to use my team as an example. To get Palmer and Saka in for Son and Fernandes, I've got to free up 2.7 million. So I would have to downgrade Solanke and Gabriel, which again is not necessarily a huge issue, right? I could go Cunha up front and then a 4.5 million defender for Gabriel. So that would be my move. That actually looks okay. Haaland, Palmer, Saka, and Burmo with Cunha, but I've got to play 2 of Rodgers, Semenyo, and Calvert-Lewin every week. Is that ideal? And I've also lost a 6 million defender? Possibly. I would argue that the Salah, Saka, Palmer draft with Trent and the 6 million defender will probably win out long term, but it ain't a guarantee. So it's a tough one. There's lots of factors to take into account. I think in terms of captaincy, there are not many weeks where Haaland is the standout until probably 18 or 19 for Everton at home and Leicester away. I'm not saying that other players are better the whole way through, but pretty much every single week there's an alternative. Like game week 14, I've said this last week, game week 14 when Haaland's got Forest at home is the same week that Palmer has Southampton away. People are going to be more than happy to captain Cole Palmer in that fixture. When Haaland's got, even Bournemouth away this week, right? Salah's got Brighton at home. When Haaland's got Man United at home in game week 16, it is Saka against Everton at home, Salah against Salah against Fulham at home, and Palmer against Brentford at home. There's just always an alternative. I just don't think you can switch it and then switch back straight away. You've got to be prepared to do it for the long term. And if you're not, and you've got a bunch of other issues to sort out, which some of you might have like me, holding Haaland is absolutely fine. I don't see this drought of goals continuing. It feels like every season under Haaland so far, there's been a little period where he's not done quite so well. There was all that talk last year or the year before about, are Man City better without him? And look what happened. He scored a ton of goals. And that will always happen when he's on the pitch because he's such a good option and he's playing in a team that will give him a lot of chances. So let me know in the comments below. Are you going to sell Haaland? I'm kind of on the fence about it because of the issues I've got. I think if Gabriel was fully fit, I think I'd definitely be selling Haaland this week. But that injury has put a bit of a spanner in the works. So I just want to go through some notes from the weekend. Top of the list is that 8 Nurias on 4 yellow cards, but I'll skip over that because I've already mentioned that quite a few times. I just put it on the list so that I didn't forget to talk about it in this video. Semenyo, who's fairly popular-ish, especially if you wildcarded in game week 6, is also on 4 yellow cards, so he's quite close to a suspension. For anyone wondering when that threshold goes up, it's not until their team has played 19 games. So once Bournemouth have played 19 matches, then the threshold goes up to 10 yellow cards before a suspension. So the reality is Semenyo at some point is going to get a 1-game suspension. I don't think many people are thinking about bringing him in right now, but if you've got a decision of Semenyo versus Rodgers to sell, if you're going to do like the Haaland to Salah switch or something like that, then maybe it's better to sell the guy that's closer to the suspension, especially if Rodgers is going to cover players like Chris Wood and that for you. For what it's worth, I think if Semenyo wasn't close to a suspension, I'd actually be very tempted to keep him because I think once you're past this Man City game, the fixtures are pretty good for Bournemouth. I think they're a decent attacking team. And the one thing Semenyo's probably got over Rodgers long term is minutes. The only game he's gone off early is that Liverpool away game where nothing was really working for Bournemouth. Outside of that, it's 88 plus every single match. Whereas what we're seeing with Rodgers at the moment is a couple more early substitutions. I don't think it's a case of Rodgers is a constant early sub threat going forward because he played 82 in game week 8, 90 in game week 7. But 56 minutes sub against Bournemouth, not great. 63 against Ipswich. He's having to play Champions League as well, something that Semenyo is not having to do. So I would probably bet over the next 10 game weeks, there's a good chance that Semenyo could outscore Rodgers. But I just think the price difference, the yellow card situation, probably makes me lean more towards selling Semenyo out of the two. And obviously Rodgers, I mentioned the early substitution just there. I've written 58th minute, but obviously I was slightly incorrect on that. Rico Lewis has now played 690 minutes and one that was 80 plus. I think there's only one match where he didn't start, which was the Arsenal game, no minutes at all. And the Brentford game he started but went off early. The minutes are just there. And I think with Kyle Walker not around at the moment, Rico Lewis probably is still a good option to just hold on to. I still think buying him is not completely clear cut, but the fact that they're still building up with this 3 centre-back option and Rico Lewis is moving into midfield a lot of the time, I just think he's doing it pretty well. And we see this sometimes with Man City players. Sometimes they just get a run in the team. I mean, I always say they're nailed on until they're not. I wouldn't call Rico Lewis completely nailed. But I think if you've got him, like, all I'm thinking is if I had Vardiol, I'd happily play him in 10 and 11 if I had to, right? Even though I don't expect a clean sheet, he's not someone I'm going to bench. I think I just have to start treating Rico Lewis the same way. Like, having a Man City defender is never a problem if they're getting minutes. And so until Walker's back or until Rico Lewis starts getting dropped a bit more, I think I'm just going to hold on to him. Would I buy him? Probably not, but I'm going to hold on to him. Welbeck back straight away. For anyone that sold him, you're a bit unlucky because he also scored as well. I think it's a bit hindsight, I think, to say it was a bad move. I mean, Hertzler didn't rule him out. I just think because of that injury and we didn't know whether he was definitely going to be available, it's fine to sell him. But he did score again. He's now got 6 goals, 1 assist this season. I don't think he's really a massive concern for the next 2 because it's Liverpool away and City at home. But after that, especially if João Pedro is not back, Danny Welbeck becomes a serious option. The fixtures are good from 12 onwards for Brighton. He seems to be their first choice number 9. Evan Ferguson's a great player too. He's just not getting the minutes. Like, Danny Welbeck had that injury. He only trained for the first time, I think, on Thursday, and he's still starting ahead of Ferguson. That's a really good sign for his minutes going forward. Calvert-Lewin, I do have some concerns about whether or not he'll start the next week because Beto's come off the bench and scored. Calvert-Lewin's blanked 5 games in a row. But I just think the amount of minutes that Calvert-Lewin's been getting, he is their first choice forward. I think benching him, like if Sean Dyche decided to bench him for Southampton away, that's a potential confidence boosting game. Like if you want your number 9 to start scoring, do you really bench them for Southampton? So I think he'll play again. For anyone that wants to get rid of him, I get it. If you want to use a free transfer to do it, fair enough, even with Southampton. He's just been awful. I think for everyone else, you've probably got to give him at least this game. Like, my general plan is I'm going to play him against Southampton, and after that, when I get a spare transfer, he's probably gone. I just can't sell any attacker before Southampton. It's too good of a fixture, even for Calvert-Lewin. Mateta back in the 11. We'll keep an eye on that. I don't think we should go for him. I think he's a bit too much money for the minutes worries, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on because Crystal Palace's fixtures are not bad. Bowen, second in line for penalties behind Paquetá. I think the thing to note there is Paquetá was off the pitch, which based on last season wouldn't happen that often, but actually his minutes aren't that great this year. He's only had, this is Paquetá I'm talking about, by the way, he's only had 2 90 minutes, 1 at 82. Every other one was kind of 75 or below. So if West Ham get penalties and Paquetá's not on the pitch, which is going to be, based on recent games, often-ish, Bowen suddenly becomes a little bit of a better option. I get it, right? Penalties are hard to come by this year. You can't predict them. So I wouldn't say that Bowen is now a must-buy because he's on penalties, but it's definitely something to keep in mind, basically. It's another piece of information. I still don't like the next few West Ham fixtures all that much. Like Forest away, Everton at home, Newcastle away, Arsenal at home. But Everton's not that bad. Newcastle defence hasn't been great this year. Bowen's a 90-minute man. I love those kind of players for FPL. Chance of getting penalties, good fixtures from 14 onwards, decent price at 7.4. Don't mind him whatsoever. And of course, Saka is back. Not only back, but especially in that first half, was incredible. Maybe that's a bit too far, but he was really good. Got a goal as well. Like if you've got Saka now, you just hold on to him. He did get subbed early, but I think he's only just back from injury. Not a problem going forward. I don't think you necessarily need to rush him for the next 2 games, but if you've got like 3 transfers or something like that, and you've already got Palmer, or even 2 transfers, you've already got Palmer, and you've got Son, and you want to just move back to Saka, I think that's just such a good long-term move. I think I stand by what I said last week. I don't think that Saka is like must own by game week 12, but if you can get him, he's a really good option. And I think for an attacker, Newcastle away and Chelsea away just wouldn't worry me that much. If you want to buy Saka, absolutely fair enough. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. Don't forget to check out Fantasy Football Hub using the links in the description below. 7-day free trial, 30% off at the moment. Otherwise, I'll catch you again tomorrow for transfer tips.